So also on topic 12, we have negotiation, getting contracts and relationships right, but we need to prepare before we negotiate. So we're going to look at preparing because that's going to give us the power in the negotiations, which everybody wants the power, right? So if you prepare right, you're going to feel confident and you're going to know everything that you need to. So that way you don't look like you're new at this. So let's dive into it. So we have some common negotiation mistakes. For example, we don't invest the time in the process. If we try to negotiate really fast, we're not going to be that successful. And if we rely on assumptions, we assume certain things that we don't have any basis of the assumption, that's going to cause us problems too. And not knowing our objectives. What do we want? What's our goal with this negotiation? So if we can clarify those, you want to buy 100 units for this price, but you don't want to pay more than this price, and you need it delivered by next Friday. These kind of clear objectives will help you out. And understanding your counterpart meaning the person you're negotiating with. What is motivating them? Why are they even in the negotiation? Is it because they want to sell you the items, or they want to get your business because they see a future with negotiations with you? What is their goal? What is their objective? And if you go into negotiations and you're not very convincing because you're disorganized, you're not confident, you're going to have a lot of mistakes because you're going to be second guessing yourself. So outcomes. So the outcomes of the negotiation. We leave money on the table sometimes. Maybe we could have got a better deal because, our negotiation, if we just negotiated something else or negotiate a little harder on this area, we could have maybe taken that money off the table and put it to our side. But then there's this other one, the winner's curse. So the winner's curse is negotiations, you're having you did a really good one last time, and so you did well, so you think you're going to do well this time. Every negotiation you should treat like your first negotiation. It doesn't matter if you've been on a hot streak. You can lose. So don't get complacent. Don't get cocky. Don't get overconfident. Don't do any of those things. Treat it as your first negotiation. Walk into it without any objectives other than the ones you've already established. And always ask for something. If you don't ask, you won't get it. I've always said that you should, if you're in negotiations, like for example, for a salary, and you've been talking to the individuals, and they give you a ballpark price of, let's say, or a ballpark salary of $60,000. Well, yes, you can ask. You can accept that. But have you asked for moving expenses? That's something you can ask for. Or have you asked for, you can say, well, 60 is a good number, but I was thinking around 70. Well, that's something you can ask for. And if they might say, well, we can't do 70, but we can meet you in the middle. Let's say 65. Well, right there, you just benefited $5,000, right? So if you didn't ask, you would not have gotten that $5,000. And once you settle on that, now you can start talking about, let's say, your start date. You can negotiate the moving expenses, all these other things. Maybe a training fund. Being in supply chain, you might want to get the APIX certifications. That might be something you need to negotiate. So all these things, if you don't ask, you won't get it. Another thing is walking away from a deal. Now, yes, there is times where you just need to walk away from a deal. And we'll go into that in a minute. But there's always a way you can find an agreement. There's another thing that we'll talk about. It's called BATNA, B-A-T-N-A, that we'll talk about. And that'll be in the next couple slides. So, and then the last thing here, probably the biggest one of all, agreeing to a bad deal. Now, a bad deal, I can't define that for you. You have to look at your objectives and say, okay, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. And then you can have some varying levels in between. But a bad deal, it's hard to come back from a bad deal. You're kind of on the opposite of that winner's curse. You might feel like, oh, you can't do a negotiation because you're just going to lose. Shake it off. Every negotiation is different. So the next one, you might win big. But like that winner's curse, don't be cocky going into the third one then, all right? So we need to develop that effective negotiating plan. So we need to figure out, are we claiming or creating value? Remember the zero-sum game or the win-win scenarios? That's what we're trying to figure out, claiming. Are we trying to get a bigger piece of the pie where the pie is limited? Or are we creating value where we're making the pie bigger so everybody can benefit? What are we doing here? And what are the facts? Is the company, a really big company, a new product, everybody's trying to get it? Or is it something that's just routine? What's the facts? Why do we need this product? When do we need it by? How much do we need? What quality do we need? All these different facts. What are the issues? What kind of issues might we run into? Well, if you're trying to negotiate with a company that's overseas, well, now we're dealing with sea freight, right? So that might be an issue of itself. So look into these issues. Maybe the person that you're negotiating with doesn't speak the English, let's say, very well, or you're negotiating with them and trying to do it in their language. A lot is lost in the translation. If you need to, find a translator, someone who does it professionally. So these are some possible issues you might run into. How strong is your position? This could come down to you're a big company and it's a little company you're negotiating with. So you have a lot of buying power, right? But if you're a smaller company trying to get a piece or get some products or items from a larger company, they might not be as flexible with their pricing. But they probably already have established their deliveries, the delivery side of it, the quality. So you have to do your research. What tactics should you use? Should you play hard or should you be more friendly with your negotiations? Knowing that you're talking to Susan at the other company and she mentioned she had a sick dog. Well, you can start off saying, well, how's your dog? Last time we talked, you said your dog was not feeling well and you were taking her to the vet. Well, that little piece of making it personal, they begin to like you. Well, having them like you will make them more flexible. But that doesn't work on everybody. So you gotta determine your tactics, and tactics can change while you're going through this. And what concessions are you willing to make? Are you willing to pay for higher or pay more? Or are you willing to accept multiple deliveries of smaller quantities, but still get the overall quantity? Are you expecting a certain high level quality? Or can you accept something a little lower? You might have to talk to your engineers or whoever set your specifications that demand that quality. You might have to talk to them. So these are some approaches that you can do to develop your negotiation plan. So you got to define your objectives. What are you negotiating for? What are your criteria? When do you need it? How much do you have to spend? How much do you need? All this stuff. Build the team. Not every negotiation is going to need a team, but your team can help you a lot. So gathering information, defining the strengths and weaknesses, determining the facts, determining issues, and defining your supplier's needs. So you got to analyze all this. And once you come up with that, you have a pretty firm plan, but you have to look at the positions too. So the position of your company, the position of their company, is there a competitor that also wants to negotiate for that product that you're trying to get or that item you're trying to get? So this helps you develop your plan. And then finally, bring in the tactics. How are you going to do it? Are you going to be a jerk? Are you going to be overly demanding? And then, like the good cop, bad cop, you're going to have someone who goes in there negotiating and then you're going to hand it off to somebody else and that person's going to say, hey, that person's been kicked off this negotiation. Then that second person's like the good cop, right? You've seen these on TV shows. And then once you determine all that, practice. Practice amongst your team if you have one. Practice with your coworkers. They'll give you pointers. So develop your strategy, your plan, and look at all the aspects. It's not just, here's the money, give it to me. It's not just that. So, like I said, there was a range of things that you can do here. So we have our what's called a zone of possible agreements, ZOPA. Sometimes it's pronounced ZOPA, as you see in the middle of the screen. So we have on the top is you. So you have your target value. That's the price you want to pay. Then you have your reservation value. Your reservation is the maximum that you're willing to pay. All right? So you see the bottom one now. This is the seller. So the seller's reservation value, that's the bottom they are willing to accept. And then you have the seller's target value. They want the most money they can get out of you, right? So that's the top end. Where they overlap is the zone of possible agreement, right? So this zone, there's a lot of possibilities. And this is where your research comes into it. What is the market selling it for? What can you buy it from other competitors? Are you bidding this out? All these different factors. So if your buyer's reserve value is, is greater than your supplier's reserve value, let's see, let me bring my little laser pointer out here. There we go. So your buyer's reserve value right here, see the little red dot, and then your supplier's reservation value right here, we need to be in this box right here, a zone of potential agreement. So we can come up to a acceptable solution for both. But there's a flip side to this. What if there's no overlap? Well, there is a solution for that too. And it's called the BATNA, B-A-T-N-A. So the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So here, this is where you try to figure out different options before you go in to the negotiation. So knowing that you need 1 million units, well, they might say, we just physically do not have 1 million units. Well, if you find out from the people you're negotiating for at your company, if you're sourcing this, they need 100,000 units within 3 months, and then 100,000 every month after that, now you have an option, right? So you can talk to your supplier that you're negotiating with and say, okay, I understand you can't give me 1 million units right away, but can you give me 100,000 in 3 months and then 100,000 after that, every month after that until we hit the million? They might say yes to that because they might know, well, our production is 200,000 a month. Well, now they know that. So they know that, and they might say, well, we're already producing 150,000 units a month for our current customers, and we have excess capacity on our machines where we can produce another 50 or 75,000. They might be able to ramp up production to absorb that 100,000, right? So there's a different option. Now, let's say they can't do that. But can they deliver consistently over time? They might be able to give you 50,000 in a month, and then let's say every other month give you another 100,000. This could be a possibility, right? So these are your options that you have. So remember their point of view on this. If they have any issues, they're not going to be able to, there might be no ZOPA, zone of potential agreement. But if you can negotiate these things and learn what their capabilities are and what your needs are and the options that you can accept, I'm sure there's a possibility that you can find the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So, reservation value. For you, this is your bottom line. Your bottom line in negotiating would be the top end, the maximum you're willing to pay. So at this point, you're indifferent whether you achieved a negotiated agreement or walk away. This is kind of like your break point. You can say, well, $1 is my reserve value, but if they come back and say, I can't go any lower than $1.05, well, Your bottom line was $1, right? That was the maximum you're willing to pay. Now there might be something else you can negotiate. Price, you might want to put price aside for now and then come back to it, because different, negotiating quality, negotiating delivery, that might change that price, right? So anything worse than your reserve value, you prefer no agreement. So if your maximum is $1, you are not going to pay $1.05, right? Because that is not, you're not authorized, or that's not one of your options. So it might be better to have no agreement if they can't meet you there. So BATNA has no reserve value. This is where you can kind of create your own program within your objectives, your goals, and never, ever, 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 ever reveal your reserve price. Because as soon as they know that the maximum you're willing to pay, guess what? That's now the price. They're not going to go any lower than that because they know you're willing to pay that. So, as an example here, your target price, your reserve value is $2.25 in this one for transistors. But their lowest price that they're willing to sell it for is $2.05. There's a 20-cent gap right here. So you should be able to negotiate somewhere within that 20-cent gap and come up with your ideal range. So if you guys remember all of this, I know I went through it kind of quickly, but if we can remember these, the ZOPA, the BATNA, and how to develop a negotiating plan, especially the tactics, we can, and try to avoid those mistakes, we can come up with the best solution, or best negotiated agreement that we can have. So, like I said before, send me any questions you have by email and let me know what you think of these videos, because I want to know to make them better for you. Thanks again.